On today's episode of Aviation Intrigue, we're going to get a little geeky and talk about our favorite flying apps. You'll be surprised at how many you use in your everyday life.
This is Aviation Intrigue.
So, we talked in a recent episode about how amazing iPads and iPhones are for flying. And Gopal, you took a recent long cross country trip and used these all along the way from takeoff to touchdown. Tell us about it.
Yeah, we'll build this sequentially, chronologically, if you will, from takeoff to touchdown, like you said. I got to tell you, I am a little bit of a techie and I love these apps, and iPad and iPhone are fantastic widgets to have on. It all starts, honestly, with what we call as pre-flight planning. So there are at least two very, very popular apps that everybody uses for pre-flight planning.
I believe one of the most popular is Garmin Pilot because they are part of the Garmin brand of the GPS navigators that we talked about that we use in airplanes, on our phones, and in our cars, right?
Yeah, Garmin Pilot, it's a very popular app that we use for pre-flight planning and in-flight flying. For flight, it's another app that's very common. I personally use for flight.
So this app is actually an app that has many, many functions that actually does take you from takeoff to touchdown. So for pre-flight planning, you can do things like check your route on the map before you go and check the weather. Those are the main uses.
Yeah, these apps like Garmin Pilot and ForeFlight have evolved over time, and they have gotten supremely sophisticated. There's a lot of things you can do. In fact, it's almost like it can be overwhelming as to how much functionality there are. So everybody kind of gets into their rhythm as to how to use it, but it is very useful for checking the route, checking the weather, planning, getting all the frequencies, knowing about the airports, everything. In fact, it even has like a 3D map that is built in so you can look at how the airport is going to look even before you ever even take off.
Yeah, that is one of the most amazing features is that you can actually see exactly where you're going to be landing long before you get there, and that definitely helps with a new airport that you had not been to.
Yeah. And the second part, immediately, what I use a lot is, and people are going to be really surprised, I actually start using commercially available weather apps like weather.com that I use all the time. I don't know. Do you use those, Elaine?
Yes, that's a really popular website with anybody who just wants to check their local weather or if they're taking a trip somewhere. And I primarily use it for radar. I like to see, okay, where's the rain moving for a place that I'm going, and what's the forecast for the day. And that's generally where I start too.
Yeah, good point. Because what I do is that, let's say I'm going on a trip a week from now. The ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot or even aviation apps do not have that kind of granularity to give you precisely what's going to happen in 7 days.
Yeah, even those apps aren't as good at forecasting, just like everything else.
Exactly. So I go to weather.com and I look at what has happened. How are the weather forecasts changing on a day by day? That gives me an idea on, are things generally improving or are they kind of getting worse?
Definitely. And then there's maybe a day or so before your trip where you're going to start using that app, because then you can get an outlook for the next 12 or 24 hours and you can actually see if that's going to affect that route that you plan to fly.
Yeah, in general, the closer you are to your departure time, the more accurate these forecasts are going to get. The FAA, which governs all of our flying, dictates that we get official weather briefing, and weather.com honestly doesn't count. So we have to rely on either ForeFlight, Garmin Pilot, or there are weather sources directly from the government that we have to use. In case we ever get into trouble, we have to be able to show, hey, I looked at the official weather.
Definitely. And that's where the app comes in, because you can actually save a weather briefing and basically prove that you've looked at the conditions for the place you're departing from, in between, and at your destination. And that's one way those apps are really useful.
Yeah, and because they're very graphical, very visual, you can see where they are. And then you can combine that with terrain that you have to cross or other airspaces that you're going to get. So a combination of weather apps and these proprietary, if you will, aviation apps gives you the weather and the pre-flight planning.
Yeah, that is amazing, because before the devices and the apps came along, we actually had to call a telephone number to get that weather briefing and take notes on your own. There weren't color maps or radar forecasts in color available right in front of you. So by now, a lot of pilots do what we call self briefing, getting all of that information via these apps.
Yeah, I mean, in the previous days when you have to call on the phone, they will describe something like there is a weather front moving north northeast, approximately 80 miles from here, and then it's moving at 40 knots to the east, and then you're trying to figure all these things and trying to get a visual. Now you get the map; it shows you exactly where the weather is.
I think it's made it a lot safer for pre-flight planning. And you're also using ForeFlight when you're about to taxi out and ready to take off in the aircraft, right?
Yeah, again, these apps are brilliant, right? So they not only have a big picture view, they can get very minute, and then you can see what taxiway you're in. So, I know you have done this thing. When you land in, like, say, big airports like Chicago or Minneapolis, usually coming in and going out is not the issue. Taxiing on the ground is very complicated. These ForeFlight and Garmin Pilot can actually guide you through that. They will tell you exactly where they are. So it makes it a lot harder for you to get lost. It's still possible, but it is a super tool for you to use even before you even get off the ground.
That is also a really popular feature. It's amazing what these apps can do, and they keep adding features like that. There are a lot of them now that allow you to use GPS navigation while taxiing around a complicated airport. And I've noticed that most pilots, even from their home airport, which you did on your trip, simply just turn it on and make sure the GPS is working as a taxi because it literally shows your exact position on the ground.
Yeah, and then modern day avionics can talk to these iPad devices. So they're constantly communicating. So whatever the plane is doing, you already know on your iPad. So that is a fantastic feature in my mind.
Yeah, and one thing the apps don't do is they don't take off and fly for you. So it sounds like that you had a good trip and were able to get the weather you needed to depart. So what happened after that with your iPad? You didn't just set it down for the flight, right?
Of course not. So a friend of mine and I flew to Asheville, North Carolina from Waukesha, Wisconsin. It's about a little over a 3 hour trip. And it was great because we did all the pre-flight planning. Weather was predicted to be fine, and then I'll tell you later what happens as we got close to Asheville. But the other thing that either ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot has, or you can get on top, is an app Sirius XM. That's something that people are really, really familiar with. That you can listen to music. There are, believe it or not, lull periods, a little slow periods when you're flying, and the music piped in is actually pretty good.
Especially on a trip, you were over 3 hours en route. So usually anything over 2 to 3 hours, a lot of people like to have some music to listen to because that's the least interesting part of a lot of trips. And so that Sirius XM that we subscribe to for all our music, you're getting that in the airplane.
Yeah, exactly. It's satellite. And it's the same
Okay.
Sirius XM that you would get in your car or on your app. People use it at home and in the car. And now you can get a aviation subscription for it. So the plane has some sort of a satellite receiver, just like you have at home or in your car. And it pipes the music, and through Bluetooth, it comes through your iPad or your headset. We wear these aviation headsets with microphone and everything else, like a boom microphone, and it pipes right in. And the nice thing is that when the ATC is talking, it it reduces the volume of the music so that you can listen to the ATC, so you never have to miss anything.
I was just going to ask about explaining that that does not interfere with air traffic control communication, or even when two people are talking to each other in the cockpit via the headsets. That feature allows the background music to kind of stay quiet until you're done talking. That is
Yeah.
really great.
Yeah, it's very similar to, like, if you're listening to radio in your car and you put it in reverse and the backup camera comes in, it lowers the volume. It's the exact same thing. Or a phone call comes in, it lowers the radio. It's the exact same thing. I think now it's a common technology. I love that. I think that the fact that you can listen to music now, you have to be very careful because you still have to pay attention to what the ATC is telling you en route and things like that. So far, for flight, all the weather commercial apps, Sirius XM, these are sort of commonplace things for us.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And what I like to do when I'm the pilot not flying on a trip is to just hook that Bluetooth up from my aviation headset to my iPhone and listen to music on there on a long trip. So you can use your cell phone in quite a few ways on a flight. So a lot of people ask, Can I call you from my cell phone, or can I text you while you're up in the air? How does that work?
Yeah, so that the answer is it depends, because it depends on how high you are. The higher you go, the chance of you picking cell phone signal is going to get lower and lower. Or even if you do, the data rates are just not going to be enough for you to have any meaningful streaming or have a call. But if you're flying over a city or very populated areas, you may be able to pick up cell phone towers even if you're high up. But in our case, we flew all the way from here to Asheville. A lot of it is just mountainous terrain. So typically when you get to about 3, 4, 5,000 feet, you no longer have that cell phone signal. And so you look at your phone and it says SOS or satellite only or emergency mode only or something like that. And then when you get closer to a town, suddenly you have a little bit more signals. You send us a text and then say, how come it hasn't gone? That's why.
That's definitely about a 3 to 4,000 foot range. I've noticed that the text won't receive or send, because that's the most common way people are going to try to communicate with you in the air. And having said that, that's not something you're actually paying attention to in those critical phases of flight, like takeoff, landing. So there's a point where you're going to catch up on your messages, but that phone is so useful. And by the way, do you take pictures in flight with your iPhone? I bet you do.
I take a lot of pictures and videos. It's this. No matter how many times you fly, if there's an airplane in the sky or when you're up there, you have to look at things. You have to take photos. You have to take videos. So my phone is filled with airplane pictures.
Is one of the most fun things about flying, that you could just carry this in your pocket and take pictures and video anytime you want. And for flying, that is one of the really cool uses of iPads and iPhones. And you don't need a cell signal to do that. And
Getting back to ForeFlight and Garmin Pilot for a second, not only we use it for pre-flight planning, like we explained, we actually use it in flight because it's like a moving map. We talked about this in a previous episode where it tells you where you are. It tells you what airspace you're in. It even has like a radar map on it, so you know if you're going to fly into weather systems. All those things are there. It shows traffic. It shows where the other airplanes are. It shows where the obstructions are. So you are using that. Again, many of these airplanes now have sophisticated avionics, but this becomes sort of a supplementary aid. So back to your question, we don't put that iPad away. You can close it momentarily only because you don't want the battery to run out or to overheat, like I think we talked about again in the previous episode. So you kind of put it away when you don't need it, but it's always there. It's got critical information.
yeah, so what's amazing is that even though, and you fly pretty modern single engine airplanes, Gopal, where there's traffic and weather installed right in large screens in the cockpit as part of your instrumentation, but yet most pilots still have their iPhone on a mount or their iPad on a mount or off to the side, because it is sometimes a little bit easier to check traffic or check something on another screen rather than hunting around for it on the other map. And so it's a really, really great backup, and a lot of people even prefer it for some of those functions, especially when you have to pull up a chart, let's say to fly a certain approach to a big airport, or to look at the map, where you don't have all the other data on there. And that's why those are actually downloaded on those devices, so you don't need a signal to use them.
Yeah, I think we mentioned before that you're required to have these charts. It could be online or in a electronic form or a paper form, but you must have it. So what it is sometimes very convenient for you to look this up on an iPhone or an iPad because it's sitting on your lap or right in front of you, rather than reaching out in the cockpit avionics in front. So it works in combination depending on the kind of sophisticated airplane you're flying. If you don't have a lot of sophistication in the airplane, you're depending much more on the iPad. But otherwise, the airplane and your iPad kind of work in tandem.
That is great. And on down to approaching your destination on your cross country trip, what other apps are you using when you get there?
So again, if you use this ForeFlight, it can tell you the airport information. It can even tell you things like, do they have rental cars there? What is the phone number for the terminal to call to arrange for the rental car or catering services? So it's got some very, very useful information. And I already mentioned that you might be even able to get like a 3D view of it. So when you're approaching it, it looks familiar. In a previous episode, we talked about how terrain looks very different in the air than when you're on the ground. So the apps like ForeFlight can help you visualize that. So you're landing is much more safe.
Is great, and you already have the airport information at your fingertips, and so you should have, as required, all the things you need to land at the airport, like a diagram of the airport layout, taxiways, the runway lengths, the radio frequencies, so that I believe at Asheville, it's a pretty big airport, right? So you had to talk to air traffic control to get in there.
Yeah, so previously I mentioned that there was a little bit of a surprise because we were expecting clear skies. As we were getting close to Asheville, there was actually a big cloud layer, and it's not unusual because when you get to the mountains of in North Carolina and Tennessee, there was a big cloud layer, and so we had to actually file and get a what we call as an IFR clearance to get into Asheville. And that's when our ForeFlight and all the in-flight instruments, if you will, came in very handy. Immediately, you check the weather, you check the radar, you check where the clouds are, you get all the frequencies, get all the clearances. And the ATC is amazing. They work very hard. Even in the case of government shutdown, they work very hard and they gave us the information, and we had a very successful landing.
That's great. So you had a little bit of cloud cover in the way, but nothing else too hazardous. And you had those devices to help make sure that you were, one, still not running into any traffic, and you had all the radio frequencies that you needed, because it takes some extra communication, right, to get that instrument flying clearance through the clouds.
Yeah, I mean, it helped that there are two pilots, right? My friend was flying the airplane, and I was by him. So as you know, two pilots in a cockpit most of the time is better than just one person, especially in a heavy workload situation.
That's great. So otherwise, the weather was pretty good then for your landing.
Yeah. So some people ask, I'm sure you get this question too, is that you can track like a United flight or an American flight on FlightAware. Can you do the same thing when you fly privately?
Yes, every registration number that's attached to an aircraft is now searchable, where you can actually track. And we talked about this on our plane spotting episode, online all the way down to just about landing, or it can actually tell you whether an aircraft has landed at its destination.
Yeah, so flightaware.com, ASB Exchange, there are a few commercially available, and most of them are free to use websites and apps that are out there that you can use. All you need to know is the tail number. Now, for famous people, they can hide their tail number, mark it private so it does not appear. I think we made a joke of Taylor Swift's airplane being able to track that in the past. It's the same thing, but most of us are not celebrities, at least not yet. So we don't really care about it. So this is very useful, Elaine, for family members to track that you're when should I come and get you, or when where you are and when are you going to arrive.
Yeah, that is absolutely amazing, because there were no easy ways previously to track a private or personal size aircraft until these websites came along, and they're just pulling data from the transponders, the beacons that are emitted from the airplane. And now that these are online, it's really a great convenience and really fun. So there were probably people tracking your flight, and not only just to make sure you made it there safely, but to know when you got there.
Yeah, so we already talked about how SiriusXM is a common app that we use in general life, also in aviation. We talked about things like Flight Aware that you can use as a non-flying public. We use it in aviation. There's one more or set of apps that we use almost regularly that have really nothing to do with aviation, but comes in really, really handy. You know what they are?
I think it's a really well known one.
Yeah, it's Uber stuff. So when you land somewhere, especially in an airport that is, in a town or nearby town, immediately I have a Uber app. So to call a ride, so hey, I want to go to the restaurant to eat, breakfast or lunch. Or if you cannot, Uber Eats or DoorDash, these are the apps that I have on my phone. So some of these are just, this got nothing to do with pilot, but it plays a big role from even before takeoff to after landing.
Yeah, those apps, especially Uber, are really the primary way I believe most pilots get around. And this actually accounts for charter pilots who fly professionally, along with pilots like yourselves who took a personal trip where that is a way to go. And if the town is big enough to have Uber, that's almost always the preferred way because you can actually set up the rides ahead of time before departure. You can tell how much it's going to cost, and it's really convenient. And if you tack Uber Eats on that, that's going to be something that is really popular with pilots because there are times when you just want to have food delivered because you're simply making a stop, or if you get to your destination, you want to have something there right away. And that has been an amazing advancement, even though it has nothing to do with aviation. It has changed the lives of flying immensely and makes flying even a lot more fun.
Yeah, totally. And then if you're staying overnight in a place, your hotel apps, whether you're staying in a Hilton or Marriott type places, those apps come in handy. That's on my phone, as well as Hertz, Enterprise, this, car rental companies. So, maybe this is surprising to a lot of people that we use regular apps while flying. It is not something very proprietary other than ForeFlight and some of these apps that are very, very geared to aviation. Other than that, everyday life apps helps us as pilots.
That is an amazing way to travel and get around. And the fact that you use that many apps on one cross country trip shows that you really are a techie.
I am. I mean, what can I say?
Is there anything that surprised you today about our discussion on flying apps? Also, we'd like you to share your favorite apps that you use while traveling.
This program is for information and entertainment purposes and are not meant as flight instruction, legal, or medical advice.
This is